Chen stared at the glowing red numbers floating above the little boy's forehead. November 23rd, 2024 to 3:47 p.m. Today's date. In exactly 47 minutes, 6-year-old Tommy Williams would die, and she was the only person in Riverside General Hospital who knew it. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the emergency department waiting room, casting harsh shadows across worried faces. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her clipboard, watching Tommy color in his dinosaur book while his mother Linda filled out insurance paperwork. The numbers above his head pulsed like a countdown timer that nobody else could see. For 3 years, Sarah had lived with this curse. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ability had arrived suddenly after a car accident left her in a coma for 2 weeks. When she woke up, the world had changed. Floating above every person's forehead, visible only to her, were the exact date and time of their death. Some showed decades away, others mere hours. She had learned to look past them, to function despite the constant reminder of mortality surrounding her. But children were different. Children weren't supposed to have numbers that close. Sarah approached the registration desk where Tommy sat swinging his legs, his sneakers barely reaching the floor. His mother had mentioned a persistent cough and fever, nothing that seemed immediately life-threatening, yet the numbers didn't lie. They never lied. "Mrs. Williams," Sarah said softly, crouching down to Tommy's eye level. "I think we should get Tommy seen right away." Linda Williams looked up from her forms, confused. "The nurse said it would be about 2 hours. His fever broke this morning, and he's been more active." Sarah's heart raced. She couldn't explain. About the numbers. 3 years ago, when she first tried to warn people, she had been labeled delusional. Doctors ordered psychiatric evaluations. Friends distanced themselves. Her own family suggested therapy. She learned to stay quiet, to find subtle ways to help when she could. "Sometimes symptoms can be deceiving," Sarah said carefully. "Let me see if I can move him up in the queue." She walked quickly to the triage station where Nurse Janet Collins was reviewing charts. Janet had worked the EO for 15 years and prided herself on following protocol to the letter. "Janet, I think we need to prioritize the Williams boy." In bed 7, Janet barely looked up. "Sarah, you handle intake paperwork. I handle medical priorities. The kid has a basic respiratory infection. He's stable, but what if he's not? What if something's being missed? Then the doctors will catch it when they see him. That's how this works." Janet's voice carried an edge of annoyance. "You're an administrative coordinator, not a nurse. Stay in your lane." Sarah felt the familiar weight of being dismissed. Her job title made her words carry less weight. Despite her intimate knowledge of every patient who walked through these doors, she watched the clock. 3:21 p.m., 26 minutes. The emergency department moved with its usual controlled chaos. Ambulances arrived with sirens wailing. Doctors in scrubs hurried between rooms. The coffee machine gurgled in the corner where exhausted residents grabbed caffeine between cases. None of them knew that in 25 minutes, everything would change. Tommy's numbers hadn't shifted. They never did. Sarah had spent months testing whether her interventions could alter the dates, but they remained fixed. She had managed to save 3 people by getting them to hospitals faster, but their numbers had simply moved to different dates later. Death, it seemed, was patient but persistent, except for one case. 6 months ago, Maria Santos brought her 8-year-old son Carlos to the EO with severe stomach pain. The numbers above his head read that same day, just 2 hours away. Sarah had convinced Maria to demand immediate attention, even helping her cause a scene in the waiting room. Carlos was rushed into surgery for a burst appendix that would have killed him within hours. But when Carlos woke up from surgery, his numbers had vanished entirely. Not moved to a different date, gone. Sarah had never seen anything like it before, or since. "Excuse me, miss." Linda Williams had approached the desk again. "Tommy's breathing seems a little harder. Should I be worried?" Sarah's pulse quickened. She looked at Tommy, whose numbers now showed 3:47 p.m. to 18 minutes away. His skin had taken on a slightly grayish pallor. "Mrs. Williams, I'm going to get Dr. Torres right now." Sarah didn't wait for permission. She walked directly to the trauma bay where Dr. Brian Torres was suturing a minor laceration. Torres was young, ambitious, and notoriously impatient with non-medical staff who stepped outside their roles. "Dr. Torres, I need you to see a patient immediately." He didn't look up from his stitching. "Sarah, what did we discuss about interrupting procedures? Go through proper channels." The Williams. Boy in the waiting room. 6 years old. "Respiratory issues, but I think there's something more serious. Did Janet triage him?" "She classified him as routine, but then he's routine. I have actual emergencies to handle." Sarah's frustration boiled over. What if you're wrong? What if waiting costs him his life? Dr. Torres finally looked at her, his expression cold. "Sarah, you're not medically trained. You process insurance forms. Unless you've suddenly developed the ability to see the future, I suggest you let us do our jobs." If only he knew how close to the truth he was. 15 minutes remained. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah returned to the waiting room, her mind racing. Tommy was now leaning heavily against his mother, his breathing visibly labored. Linda was stroking his hair, whispering reassurances. "Tommy's tired, Mommy," the boy whispered. Linda's concern deepened. She approached the registration desk again, this time with more urgency. "Something's not right. He was fine an hour ago, but now he can barely keep his eyes open." Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She walked to the emergency alarm by the main door, the one reserved for cardiac arrests and trauma. Codes. Her hand hovered over the red button. Pressing it would bring every available doctor running, but it would also likely cost her job for triggering a false alarm. The numbers above Tommy's head read 3:47 p.m., 8 minutes. Sarah pressed the button. The alarm's piercing wail filled the emergency department. Doctors and nurses came running from every direction, their training taking over. Dr. Torres burst through the trauma bay doors, scanning for the emergency. "Where's the code?" he shouted over the alarm. Sarah pointed to Tommy, who had gone completely limp in his mother's arms. "Here. Shut off that alarm." "This isn't a code situation." Dr. Torres stopped mid-sentence as he saw Tommy's condition. The boy's lips were turning blue, his breathing shallow and rapid. Within seconds, Tommy was surrounded by medical staff. They transferred him to a gurney and rushed him into the trauma bay. Sarah followed, despite protests from the security guard. "What's his presentation?" Dr. Torres called out as they worked. "Respiratory distress, cyanosis, altered mental status." Nurse Collins replied, now fully engaged despite her earlier dismissal. "Get me a chest x-ray and arterial blood gas. Start oxygen at 4 liters. Sarah watched the clock, 3:46 p.m., 1 minute. The x-ray results appeared on the monitor within seconds, revealing what no one had expected. Tommy's chest cavity was filled with fluid, a massive pleural effusion that was crushing his lungs. "How did we miss this?" Dr. Torres muttered, preparing for an emergency thoracentesis. "This should have been obvious on examination." "Sometimes these things develop rapidly," Nurse Collins said, though her voice carried doubt. As Dr. Torres inserted the needle to drain the fluid, Sarah watched the numbers above Tommy's head. 3:47 p.m. arrived, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, as the first drops of fluid drained from Tommy's chest and his oxygen levels began to improve, something extraordinary occurred. The numbers flickered and vanished. Tommy Williams would live. But Sarah's relief was short-lived. Dr. Marcus Webb, the hospital administrator and head of the medical review board, had arrived. Webb was a tall, severe man who treated the hospital like a corporation and staff like replaceable assets. His presence meant trouble. Who triggered the false alarm? Webb demanded. The trauma bay fell silent except for the steady beep of Tommy's now stable heart monitor. "I did," Sarah said quietly. Webb's face darkened. "Miss Chen, you've just violated about 6 hospital policies and potentially created liability issues. My office, now." As Sarah followed Webb down the corridor, she heard Linda Williams crying with relief as doctors explained that Tommy would make a full recovery. The sound gave her strength for what was coming. Webb's office was all glass and chrome, overlooking the hospital parking garage. Awards and certifications covered the walls, along with efficiency metrics and budget charts. Webb settled behind his desk like a judge preparing for sentencing. "Sarah, in your 3 years here, you've been a model employee. Reliable, punctual, efficient, which makes this behavior even more puzzling." He pulled up her file on his computer. "This isn't your first incident of overstepping boundaries. There was the Santos boy 6 months ago where you caused a disruption in the waiting room. The Martinez woman where you insisted on calling 911 against medical advice. The Thompson case where you demanded immediate psychiatric evaluation." Sarah remained silent. Each case he mentioned was someone she had saved. "I'm recommending immediate suspension pending a full psychiatric evaluation. Your behavior suggests possible delusional thinking, or a savior complex that makes you unsuitable for patient contact. Dr. Webb, I saved that boy's life." "No." "Sarah, the medical staff saved his life by doing their jobs. You nearly caused a disaster by crying wolf. What if there had been a real emergency while our entire trauma team was responding to your false alarm?" The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. She had been accused of crying wolf while actually predicting the wolf's exact arrival time. "I'd like to speak to Dr. Harper about this," Sarah said. Dr. Elizabeth Harper chaired the hospital board and was known for her fairness, though she rarely involved herself in personnel matters. Webb's expression suggested this was both unexpected and unwelcome. "Dr. Harper is reviewing research grants today. She doesn't have time for disciplinary hearings." "Then I'll wait." Something in Sarah's tone made Webb study her more carefully. In 3 years, she had never pushed back against authority, never demanded meetings, never showed anything but quiet compliance. "Sarah, what's really going on here? Because your behavior today suggests something more than just overzealousness about patient care." Sarah looked out the window at the gray Portland sky. Rain had begun to fall, streaking the glass with patterns that reminded her of the tears she had shed the night she first realized what her ability meant. She could see death coming for everyone she met, but she was powerless to change fate for most of them. Except when she wasn't. "Dr. Webb, what if I told you I knew Tommy Williams was going to die at exactly 3:47 p.m. today?" Webb leaned back in his chair. "I'd say you're confirming my recommendation for psychiatric evaluation. The Santos boy was going to die at 2:15 p.m. on May 18th. The Martinez woman at 11:33 a.m. on August 4th. The Thompson man at 6:22 p.m. on September 12th. I knew because I can see it." "See what, Sarah?" "Death dates, above everyone's head. The exact time they're going to die." Webb's expression shifted from annoyance to concern. This wasn't defiance or medical pretensions. This sounded like a genuine psychiatric break. "Sarah, I'm going to call Dr. Harrison from psychiatry." "Check the records," Sarah interrupted. "Every person I've intervened with. Look at the exact times I claimed that they would die, and look at when their medical emergencies occurred. Look at the correlation." Webb's hand paused over his phone. Despite his skepticism, he was a data-driven administrator. Patterns and records were his specialty. You're saying you predicted the exact time of their medical crises. Not predicted. Saw. There's a difference. Webb pulled up the electronic records Sarah had mentioned. The Santos case showed Carlos arriving at 11:47 a.m. with stomach pain, with Sarah's incident report noting urgent concern for patient status at approximately 2:15 p.m. Carlos went into crisis at 2:13 p.m. The Martinez case showed similar precision. Sarah had noted extreme concern for patient deterioration at approximately 11:33 a.m. in her shift report. Elena Martinez suffered a heart attack in the waiting room at 11:31 a.m. Webb's scientific mind struggled with what he was seeing. The correlations were impossible to explain by chance, yet the explanation Sarah offered was equally impossible to accept. Even if what you're claiming were true, Webb said slowly, you can't trigger hospital-wide alarms based on visions. Then what should I do? Let them die? Before Webb could answer, there was a knock on his office door. Dr. Elizabeth Harper entered without waiting for permission, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the long day, her eyes sharp with intelligence and authority. "Marcus, I heard. There was an incident in the EO involving a false alarm and a child's life." Webb straightened in his chair. Dr. Harper's presence changed the entire dynamic of the room. She was not just the board chair, but also one of the most respected neurologists on the West Coast, with research publications on consciousness and brain trauma. "Dr. Harper, this doesn't require your attention. It's a personnel matter." A personnel matter that resulted in saving a child's life? Dr. Harper moved to the window, looking out at the rain. "I've been reviewing the incident reports. Young Tommy Williams had a massive pleural effusion that would have been fatal within minutes. Yet somehow, our administrative coordinator knew to trigger an emergency response at exactly the right moment." She turned to face Sarah directly. "Ms. Chen, would you mind explaining how you knew?" Sarah found herself caught between two authorities, but something in Dr. Harper's tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. This was a scientist asking a question, not an administrator protecting liability. "I can see when people are going to die," Sarah said simply. "Not how, just when. The exact time appears above their heads like a countdown." Dr. Harper's expression didn't change. "And you've been using this ability to save lives?" "When I can. Most of the time. There's nothing I can do. The dates are fixed. But sometimes, if I can get them medical attention fast enough, the dates change. No, they disappear entirely." Dr. Harper walked to Webb's desk and pulled up Tommy's chart on the computer. "Marcus, what does the timeline show for today's incident?" Webb reluctantly opened the records. Patient arrived at 2:31 p.m. with respiratory complaints. Triaged as routine. At 3:39 p.m., Sarah triggered the emergency alarm. Patient went into respiratory distress at 3:47 p.m. 8 minutes between the alarm and the crisis, Dr. Harper mused. "Miss Chen, what time did you see above Tommy's head?" 3:47 p.m. exactly. Dr. Harper nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to conduct a small experiment. Marcus, could you give us the room?" Webb looked confused. "Dr. Harper, with respect, this employee has admitted to experiencing hallucinations that have coincidentally saved 4 lives with precise timing." Dr. Harper's voice carried quiet authority. "Marcus, I'll handle this from here." After Webb reluctantly left, Dr. Harper closed the door and returned to the window. The rain had intensified, turning the city into a watercolor painting of grays and muted lights. "Sarah, 3 years ago you suffered a traumatic brain injury. In a car accident. You were comatose for 2 weeks." Sarah nodded, wondering where this was leading. "I reviewed your medical records. You had significant damage to your temporal lobe, specifically the area associated with time perception and memory formation. The injury was severe enough that we weren't sure you'd regain normal cognitive function. But I did. Did you? Or did you gain something else entirely? Dr. Harper turned from the window. There are documented cases of brain trauma resulting in unusual perceptual abilities. Savant syndrome, synesthesia, enhanced pattern recognition. What you're describing isn't impossible from a neurological standpoint. Sarah felt a wave of relief. Someone was actually listening, actually considering the possibility that she wasn't delusional. The question, Dr. Harper continued, is whether we can verify this ability scientifically. How? Tomorrow, I want you to work a normal shift, but I want you to record every death date you see. Times, dates, patient names if possible. We'll compare your predictions to actual outcomes. Over the following weeks. Sarah hesitated. Dr. Harper, what if people find out? What if they think I'm some kind of freak or that I'm cursing them somehow? Then we keep this between us until we have enough data to present findings. But Sarah, if you truly possess this ability, it represents one of the most significant discoveries in consciousness research in decades. It could revolutionize how we understand death, time perception, and the nature of precognition itself. The weight of Dr. Harper's words settled over Sarah. She had spent 3 years thinking of her ability as a burden, a curse that set her apart from everyone else. The possibility that it could be something valuable, something that could help advance human understanding, had never occurred to her. There's something else, Sarah said. The people I've saved, their dates disappear completely. They don't. Yet new death dates. Dr. Harper's eyes widened. They become effectively immortal from your perspective? I don't know. Maybe they just die when they're supposed to now, naturally, without me being able to see it coming. Or maybe... Sarah paused, the implications dawning on her. Maybe they were only supposed to die because I wasn't there to save them. A temporal paradox, Dr. Harper whispered. You see their deaths, which allows you to prevent them, which removes the deaths from your sight entirely. The two women stood in silence, contemplating the enormity of what they were discussing. Outside, the storm was intensifying, wind rattling. The windows of the hospital where Sarah had just rewritten a child's fate. Dr. Harper, what happens now? Now we document everything. We gather evidence. And we prepare to challenge everything the medical community thinks it knows about life, death, and the nature of time itself. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Webb knocked on the door again. When he entered, his expression had changed from administrative concern to something approaching awe. Dr. Harper, I've been running more correlations on Ms. Chen's interventions. The statistical probability of her timing being coincidental is approximately 1 in 47 million. Dr. Harper smiled slightly. Marcus, I think we need to discuss Ms. Chen's role here at the hospital. But first, I believe she deserves an apology for being called delusional when she was actually saving lives. Webb looked uncomfortable, his bureaucratic certainty shaken by the weight of evidence. Sarah, if what the data suggests is true, then I may have misjudged the situation. The data doesn't lie, Sarah said quietly, echoing something she had learned about her ability. Numbers don't have agendas. As evening fell over Portland, Sarah walked through the hospital corridors with a new sense of purpose. Above the heads of patients, visitors, and staff, the glowing numbers continued their countdown to futures she alone could see. But now, instead of feeling burdened by the knowledge, she felt empowered by it. Tommy Williams slept peacefully in the pediatric ICU, his breathing steady and strong. Above his head, where numbers had once counted down to his death, there was now only empty air, the space where fate used to be, before someone cared enough to change it. And in that empty space, Sarah saw something she had never seen before. Possibility. The real test would come tomorrow, when Dr. Harper's experiment began, and Sarah would document every death she could see coming. But tonight, she would go home knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the future wasn't as fixed as everyone believed. Sometimes, all it took was someone willing to press the alarm button when nobody else could see the emergency coming. The next morning arrived with typical Pacific Northwest drizzle, the kind that made everything look washed out and uncertain. Sarah walked through the automatic doors of Riverside General at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes earlier than usual. The hospital felt different now, as if the building itself had shifted overnight to accommodate the weight of what she and Dr. Harper had discussed. In her pocket, she carried a small notebook that Dr. Harper had given her the evening before. Its pages were blank, waiting to be filled with the most unusual research data any medical facility had ever collected. Sarah's instructions were simple. Document every death date she observed. Note the times with precision, and maintain absolute discretion about the experiment. The early morning shift was always quieter, populated mostly by overnight patients, and the skeleton crew of medical staff who worked while the city slept. Sarah moved through the emergency department with new awareness, cataloging the floating numbers above each person's head with clinical detachment she had never managed before. Above the head of Roger Kellerman, the night security guard finishing his rounds, the numbers read June 15th, 2067. Sarah calculated quickly. The man would live another 43 years, dying peacefully in his 80s. She wrote this down, along with his approximate age and general health appearance. Near the coffee station, Dr. Amanda Foster was reviewing patient charts from the night shift. Her numbers showed September 3rd, 2089, meaning she would live well into her hundreds. Sarah noted that Dr. Foster appeared to be in her early 30s, suggesting she would live an extraordinarily long life by any standard. The notebook felt heavy in her hands as she filled it with these intimate secrets of mortality. Every entry represented a lifespan, a future that these people would live without ever knowing their expiration date. Sarah wondered if knowing would make them live differently, more deliberately, or if it would paralyze them with dread. Maria Santos arrived at 7:15 a.m. for her cafeteria shift, the same woman whose son Carlos had been saved 6 months earlier when Sarah convinced her to demand immediate medical attention. Maria's face lit up when she saw Sarah, and she hurried over with the enthusiasm of someone greeting a miracle worker. "Sarah, how are you, mi amor? Carlos starts high school next week. Can you believe it? He's so healthy now, playing soccer, getting good grades." Maria's voice carried the weight of maternal gratitude that never fully faded. "The doctors say his recovery was remarkable, like someone was watching over him." Sarah smiled, remembering the moment when Carlos's death numbers had vanished entirely after his emergency appendectomy. Above Maria's head, she could see distant numbers indicating the woman would live until February 2078, dying in her 90s surrounded by grandchildren she hadn't yet met. "I'm so glad he's doing well, Maria. He's a strong kid." "Strong, yes, but also lucky. Lucky that you made such a fuss that day. The doctors told me later that waiting another hour would have been too long." Maria patted Sarah's arm with genuine affection. "You have good instincts about people, you know that." If only she knew how good, Sarah thought. As Maria headed to the cafeteria kitchen, Sarah caught sight of Dr. Torres emerging from the elevator bank. The young doctor's numbers read October 12th, 2071, indicating he would live another 47 years. He saw Sarah and approached with an expression that seemed caught between professional courtesy and genuine curiosity. "Sarah, about yesterday. I owe you an apology." Dr. Torres ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had noticed he made when uncomfortable. "I was dismissive when you raised concerns about the Williams boy. If you hadn't pushed for immediate attention." "You don't need to apologize, Dr. Torres. You were following protocol." "But protocol would have killed that kid." He paused, studying her face with the intensity he usually reserved for difficult diagnoses. "How did you know?" "I've been thinking about it all night." His presentation didn't match his acuity level until the very end. Sarah felt the familiar weight of having to deflect questions she couldn't answer honestly. Sometimes you just get a feeling about patients. Intuition, maybe. Intuition that precise? Dr. Torres shook his head. Sarah, I've been practicing emergency medicine for 8 years. I've never seen intuition that could predict the exact timing of a medical crisis. What you did was almost supernatural. The word supernatural hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah wanted to tell him how accurate his assessment was, but Dr. Harper's experiment required secrecy until they had gathered enough evidence to present their findings credibly. Sometimes we notice things without realizing it, Sarah said carefully. Subtle changes in breathing, skin color, behavior patterns. Maybe I just process those observations differently. Dr. Torres nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Well, whatever it was, that kid is alive. Because of you, his parents wanted me to thank you personally. They're calling you their guardian angel. Guardian angel. Sarah had never thought of herself in those terms, but perhaps that's what she had become, someone who could see death coming and occasionally stand in its way. The idea both comforted and terrified her. Throughout the morning, Sarah continued her documentation. Each entry in the notebook represented a life story that would unfold according to the precise timeline only she could see. There was Mrs. Patterson, age 73, who would die on Christmas morning 2031 while surrounded by her great-grandchildren. There was Jake Morrison, the young paramedic, whose numbers showed he would live until August 2089, long enough to see medicine advance in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But it was the entry she made at 10:47 a.m. that would change everything. Detective Rosa Martinez walked through the emergency department doors with the measured gait of someone who had seen too much violence but still believed in justice. She was in her mid-50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. What made Sarah's blood run cold wasn't the detective's presence, but the numbers floating above her head. November 24th, 2024. Tomorrow, 2:33 p.m. Detective Martinez was going to die in 29 hours and 46 minutes. Sarah's hand trembled as she wrote the entry, her careful clinical handwriting deteriorating into barely legible scrawl. This was different from Tommy Williams or any of the others she had saved. Those had been medical emergencies where her intervention could mobilize hospital resources to prevent death. But Detective Martinez's numbers suggested something else. Entirely, something that would happen outside these walls, beyond Sarah's ability to influence. Detective Martinez approached the information desk where Sarah was stationed, pulling out a badge and a small notebook of her own. I'm Detective Martinez, Portland Police. I need to speak with whoever was on duty yesterday afternoon regarding the Williams boy incident. Sarah's throat went dry. That would be me. I'm Sarah Chen. Ms. Chen, I'm not here about any wrongdoing. The Williams family asked me to look into something that's been bothering them. Detective Martinez's voice was professional but kind, the tone of someone who understood that people were often nervous around police officers. They said you seemed to know their son was in crisis before anyone else did. They're wondering if you might have noticed something suspicious beforehand. Suspicious? Tommy Williams was perfectly healthy when he left school yesterday afternoon. His teacher said he was running around at recess, laughing with friends, showing no signs of illness. Yet by the time his mother brought him here 3 hours later, he was developing a life-threatening condition. Detective Martinez consulted her notes. The doctors can't explain how such a severe pleural effusion could develop so rapidly in a previously healthy child. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She had been so focused on saving Tommy that she hadn't considered why he needed saving in the first place. Most of the people she had helped over the years had underlying conditions or risk factors that explained their medical emergencies. But Tommy had been completely healthy until yesterday. I don't understand what you're suggesting, Detective. I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm gathering information. Detective Martinez studied Sarah's face with the practiced eye of someone trained to read people. But it's curious that you seem to anticipate the exact timing of his crisis. The hospital staff said you triggered an emergency alarm 8 minutes before the boy showed signs of distress. Sarah's mind raced. How could she explain her foreknowledge without sounding delusional? How could she warn Detective Martinez about tomorrow without revealing the source of her information? I work with sick children every day, Sarah said carefully. You learn to recognize subtle changes that others might miss. What specific changes did you notice in Tommy Williams? The question was direct, professional, and impossible to answer honestly. Sarah hadn't noticed any changes because there were no changes to notice. She had acted purely on the death date floating above the boy's head. His breathing seemed slightly labored. His color was off. The lies felt heavy in her mouth, but the alternative was admitting to abilities that would make her sound like she belonged in a psychiatric ward rather than a police interview. Detective Martinez wrote something in her notebook, then looked up with a different expression, one that suggested the interview was about to take a new direction. Miss Chen, I've been a detective for 22 years. I've investigated everything, from simple theft to complex homicides. In my experience, when someone shows unusual knowledge about events they shouldn't be able to predict, it's worth exploring. She paused, letting the implications settle. I'm going to ask you directly. Is there anything you're not telling me about yesterday's incident? The numbers above Detective Martinez's head seemed to pulse brighter, as if time itself was emphasizing the urgency of tomorrow's deadline. Sarah realized she was facing an impossible choice. She could maintain her lies and let Detective Martinez walk unknowingly toward her death, or she could tell the truth and risk destroying Dr. Harper's experiment, while likely being dismissed as mentally unstable. Detective Martinez, what if I told you that I sometimes know things before they happen? The detective's pen stopped moving. What kind of things? Medical emergencies, dangerous situations, times when people are in more trouble than anyone realizes. Are you saying you're psychic? Sarah almost laughed at the inadequacy of the word. I'm saying I can see when people are going to die. The exact time appears above their heads like a countdown clock. That's how I knew about Tommy Williams, and that's how I've saved 3 other people over the past year. Detective Martinez closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. The skepticism Sarah expected didn't appear on the detective's face. Instead, there was something else, recognition perhaps, or at least the willingness to consider possibilities that most people would dismiss outright. Miss Chen, in my line of work, I've learned not to discount unusual sources of information too quickly. I've solved cases based on dreams, hunches, and insights that couldn't be explained through conventional logic. Detective Martinez opened her notebook again. Tell me about these other people you've saved. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah detailed each intervention: Carlos Santos and his burst appendix, Elena Martinez and her heart attack, David Thompson and his psychotic break. She provided dates, times, and the precise moments when she had felt compelled to act. Detective Martinez took notes without comment, occasionally asking for clarification, but never expressing disbelief. These are all medical emergencies, Detective Martinez observed when Sarah finished. Natural causes, essentially, even if the timing was unusual. But you said you can see when anyone is going to die? Sarah nodded, her heart pounding as she approached the moment of truth. Detective Martinez, according to what I can see, you're going to die tomorrow at 2:33 p.m. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Detective Martinez's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw her grip on the pen tighten slightly. Tomorrow's Sunday. I'm not even working. That doesn't matter. The times are always exact, regardless of circumstances. Detective Martinez was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face with the intensity of someone trying to determine if they were speaking with a prophet or a madwoman. Ms. Chen, let's assume for a moment that what you're telling me is true. Have you ever been wrong about these death times? Never, not once in 3 years. And you've never been able to prevent a death by warning the person in advance? Sarah hesitated. This was the heart of her dilemma. I've only been able to save people by getting them immediate medical attention for health emergencies. I've never tried to prevent a death that was going to happen outside a hospital setting. Because you were afraid people wouldn't believe you. Because I was afraid they'd have me committed. Detective Martinez smiled grimly. Ms. Chen, I've been investigating a series of unusual deaths over the past 6 months. People dying in circumstances that seem natural but show patterns that suggest something more complex. If you're telling me the truth about your ability, you might be the key to understanding what's been happening. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. What kind of patterns? Healthy people developing sudden fatal medical conditions. Always at times when they're alone or with minimal witnesses. Always preceded by brief encounters with individuals who disappear before they can be properly identified. Detective Martinez leaned forward. Ms. Chen, what if someone else has an ability similar to yours, but instead of seeing death dates, they can cause them? The possibility hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent 3 years assuming that the death dates she saw were natural, inevitable endpoints that she could occasionally postpone through medical intervention. But what if some of those dates weren't natural at all? What if someone was deliberately setting the countdown clock she could see? Detective Martinez, if that's true, then Tommy Williams might have been targeted by someone who didn't expect a hospital employee to have advance warning of the exact time he would die. Sarah's notebook felt like it was burning in her hands. Every entry she had made that morning suddenly carried new weight. What if she wasn't just documenting natural death dates? What if she was recording a killer's schedule? I need to call Dr. Harper, Sarah said, reaching for her phone. Dr. Harper? She's the one who's been helping me document and understand my ability. She thinks it might be related to brain trauma I suffered 3 years ago. Detective Martinez's expression sharpened. Ms. Chen, when exactly did your ability first manifest? About 2 weeks after I woke up from a coma. I'd been in a car accident. Do you remember anything about that accident? Sarah frowned, trying to recall details that had always seemed hazy. I was driving home from work late one night. It was raining. Another car ran a red light and hit me broadside. The other driver was never found or never identified. The police said the car was stolen and abandoned. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no leads. Detective Martinez wrote rapidly in her notebook. Ms. Chen, I'm going to share something with you that's not public knowledge. 3 years ago, we investigated a series of hit-and-run accidents that followed an unusual pattern. The victims all survived their initial injuries, but developed strange medical conditions during their recovery periods. Conditions that seemed to give them unusual perceptual abilities. Sarah's blood ran cold. How many victims? 7 that we could identify. Most of them died within months of developing their abilities, always from sudden medical emergencies. That couldn't be adequately explained. What happened to the others? You're the only survivor we've been able to locate. The emergency department suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Sarah looked around at the familiar space where she had worked for 3 years, wondering how many of the people she interacted with daily might be connected to whatever had happened to her and the other accident victims. Detective Martinez, if someone is killing people with abilities like mine, then your death tomorrow might be connected to our conversation today. Detective Martinez closed her notebook and stood up. Ms. Chen, I'm going to need you to come with me to the police station. We need to put you in protective custody while we investigate this further. I can't leave. My shift doesn't end until 7, and Dr. Harper is expecting me to continue documenting what I observe. Dr. Harper can wait. If what we're discussing is accurate, then every moment you remain in public increases the danger to both of us. Sarah looked around the emergency department one more time, seeing it now as a place of vulnerability rather than safety. The death dates floating above everyone's heads took on sinister new meaning. Were any of these people scheduled to die? Because of their proximity to her. Above the head of Janet Collins, the triage nurse, Sarah saw numbers that had never been there before. November 24th, 2024, 4:17 p.m. Janet was going to die tomorrow. Less than 2 hours after Detective Martinez. "Detective," Sarah whispered, "we have a bigger problem." Part 3, the Portland Police Bureau's Central Precinct, felt like a fortress compared to the exposed openness of the hospital. Detective Martinez led Sarah through corridors lined with wanted posters and departmental commendations, past interrogation rooms and evidence lockers, to a small conference room with no windows and walls thick enough to muffle even the loudest conversations. Sarah sat at a metal table that had seen thousands of interviews, her notebook open before her like evidence in her own trial. Across from her, Detective Martinez spread out files that contained photographs, witness statements, and medical reports. Dating back 3 years, the documents painted a picture of systematic murder disguised as natural death. "This is Rebecca Morrison," Detective Martinez said, sliding a photograph across the table. "Age 28, kindergarten teacher. Car. Accident victim from 3 years ago, same night as yours. Developed the ability to sense people's emotional states with unusual accuracy. Found dead in her apartment 6 months later from an aneurysm that formed and ruptured within hours." Sarah studied the photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a bright smile, trying to imagine what it would be like to feel everyone's emotions as intensely as she saw their death dates. David Park, age 34, accountant. Another photograph joined the first. Same accident pattern. Developed enhanced mathematical abilities that allowed him to predict financial market fluctuations with startling precision. Died of sudden cardiac arrest while alone in his office. The photographs kept coming, each representing a life cut short after developing abilities that should have been gifts, but had apparently become death sentences instead. Jennifer Walsh, age 26, artist, could see colors that don't exist in normal human perception. Died of a stroke while painting alone in her studio. Michael Rodriguez, age 41, construction worker, could sense structural weaknesses in buildings just by touching them. Died when scaffolding collapsed on a job site where he was working alone. Sarah felt sick as the pattern became clear. Someone is hunting people like us. Not just hunting. Studying, Detective Martinez opened another file, this one containing medical reports and autopsy findings. Every one of these victims had their brains removed and preserved for research. The official explanation was standard autopsy procedure, but the preservation techniques used were far more sophisticated than anything our medical examiner would employ. Someone wanted to study how their abilities worked. And now they know you exist. The implications settled over Sarah like a suffocating blanket. For 3 years, she had believed her ability was a unique burden that set her apart from everyone else. Now she learned she was part of a group, and that group was being systematically eliminated. Detective Martinez, why didn't this make the news? 7 people dying under suspicious circumstances should have attracted media attention. It would have if anyone had connected the deaths. They happened over 18 months in different parts of the city, with different apparent causes. The only common thread was the car accidents, and even those seemed random until I started looking for patterns. Detective Martinez pulled out a map of Portland with red pins marking locations. The pins formed a rough circle around the city center, with Sarah's accident location at the northernmost point. The accidents all happened within a 10-mile radius. Always late at night, always in weather conditions that made visibility poor. The stolen vehicles were always found abandoned within hours, completely clean of evidence. Sarah traced the circle with her finger, wondering how many other potential victims had been in those cars. How many had developed abilities they never lived long enough to understand? Why me? Why am I still alive when the others died? That's what we need to figure out. There has to be something different about your situation, something that's kept you off their radar until now. Sarah thought about her 3 years at the hospital, her careful secrecy about her ability, her isolation from anyone who might have noticed her unusual insights about patient conditions. She had survived by staying invisible, by never fully revealing what she could do. I never told anyone until yesterday. The others might have been more open about their abilities. Rebecca Morrison was teaching kindergarten students to read emotions from facial expressions. David Park was giving financial advice based on his market predictions. Jennifer Walsh was creating art that used colors people had never seen before. Detective Martinez nodded grimly. They were all using their abilities publicly, making themselves visible to anyone looking for people like them. But now I've used mine publicly too. Tommy Williams, the emergency alarm, the medical staff knowing I predicted his crisis. Which means you're now visible to whoever killed the others. A knock on the conference room door interrupted their conversation. Detective Martinez called out permission to enter, and a tall man in expensive suit walked in carrying a briefcase and an expression of barely contained frustration. Detective Martinez, I'm Agent William Hayes, FBI. He showed his badge without sitting down. I understand you've been investigating deaths that may be connected to a federal case. Detective Martinez's posture stiffened. Agent Hayes, this is a local investigation. I wasn't aware the FBI had any involvement. We didn't, until this morning when hospital security footage flagged an individual of interest. Agent Hayes opened his briefcase and withdrew a series of photographs. These were taken yesterday in the emergency department of Riverside General Hospital. The photograph showed Sarah triggering the emergency alarm, medical staff responding to Tommy Williams, and Dr. Harper speaking with Sarah in Dr. Webb's office. But what made Sarah's blood freeze was the final photograph, taken from the hospital parking garage. A figure in dark clothing stood beside a black sedan, watching the hospital entrance through binoculars. The image was grainy, but the telephoto lens had captured enough detail to show a face that Sarah recognized from 3 years of nightmares about her car accident. That's him, Sarah whispered. That's the man who hit my car. Agent Hayes sat down across from her. Miss Chen, that man is Dr. Marcus Holbrook, former neuroscientist with the National Institutes of Health. He was dismissed from his position 2 years ago for conducting unauthorized experiments on human subjects. Detective Martinez leaned forward. What kind of experiments? Dr. Holbrook believed that traumatic brain injuries could unlock latent psychic abilities in certain individuals. His research proposal involved deliberately inducing brain trauma in volunteers to test his hypothesis. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. You're saying he caused our accidents on purpose? We believe Dr. Holbrook has been conducting illegal human experimentation for the past 3 years. The car accidents were his method of inducing the precise type of brain trauma most likely to produce psychic phenomena. And then he kills the subjects who develop abilities. After studying them extensively, we've been tracking him for 18 months, but he's always stayed one step ahead of our investigation. Detective Martinez gathered up her files. Agent Hayes, why wasn't local law enforcement informed about this federal investigation? Because Dr. Holbrook has connections throughout the medical and research communities. We couldn't risk information leaks that might warn him we were closing in. Sarah looked at the photograph of Dr. Holbrook again, remembering the moment 3 years ago when his car had slammed into hers on that rainy night. She had always assumed it was a random accident, a drunk driver or someone texting while driving. Learning that it had been deliberate that her subsequent abilities were the result of a planned experiment, made her feel violated in ways she couldn't begin to process. Agent Hayes, if Dr. Holbrook was watching the hospital yesterday, then he knows about my ability now. Which is why we need to move quickly. Dr. Holbrook's pattern has been to study his subjects for several weeks before eliminating them. With you, he may accelerate that timeline now that you've demonstrated your abilities publicly. Detective Martinez checked her watch. It's 2:15 p.m. According to Sarah, I'm supposed to die in 23 hours and 18 minutes. Agent Hayes looked confused. I'm sorry? Ms. Chen can see death dates above people's heads. She predicted my death for tomorrow at 2:33 p.m. Agent Hayes studied Sarah with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. Ms. Chen, what do you see above my head right now? Sarah looked up at the space above Agent Hayes. Unlike everyone else she had encountered, there were no numbers floating there at all. The absence was so striking that she blinked several times, wondering if her ability was malfunctioning. I don't see anything. Nothing at all? You're the first person in 3 years who doesn't have a death date visible. Agent Hayes exchanged glances with Detective Martinez. Ms. Chen, that's because I'm not going to die of natural causes or planned murder. I'm going to die in a classified situation that's outside the scope of normal prediction. What does that mean? It means that death dates can apparently be blocked or obscured under certain circumstances. Agent Hayes opened another file from his briefcase. We've been studying Dr. Holbrook's methods based on evidence recovered from his previous locations. His subjects don't just develop psychic abilities. Those abilities can be manipulated, enhanced, or suppressed using specific techniques. Sarah felt a new wave of horror. You're saying he can control what I see? We're saying he might be able to influence it, yes. The death dates you observe might not be entirely natural or inevitable. Detective Martinez stood up abruptly. Agent Hayes, are you suggesting that Sarah's predictions about my death tomorrow might be the result of Dr. Holbrook's manipulation? It's possible. If he can set the conditions that lead to specific death times, and if Miss Chen can see those times in advance, then he's created a perfect system for testing the accuracy of psychic prediction. Sarah's notebook felt contaminated in her hands. Everything I've seen, everyone I've saved, it could all be part of his experiment. Not necessarily. Your ability appears to be genuine, but some of the deaths you're predicting might be artificially induced rather than naturally occurring. The conference room felt like it was closing in around them. Sarah had spent 3 years learning to live with the burden of seeing everyone's death, but she had always assumed those deaths were natural endpoints. Learning that someone might be deliberately setting those timers made her feel like a puppet dancing to strings she couldn't see. Agent Hayes, how do we stop him? By using you as bait. Detective Martinez slammed her hand on the table. Absolutely not. We're not putting a civilian in danger to catch this psychopath. Detective Martinez, Ms. Chen is already in danger. Dr. Holbrook knows about her abilities now, which means he'll move to either study her or eliminate her within days. Agent Hayes turned back to Sarah. Ms. Chen, we believe Dr. Holbrook will attempt to contact you directly. He's curious about subjects who survive longer than the others, and you've demonstrated abilities that are more refined than any of his previous subjects. What kind of contact? Based on his previous patterns, he'll likely approach you in a professional capacity. Pose as a researcher or doctor interested in your insights about patient care. He'll want to study you in controlled conditions. Before deciding whether to preserve you for longer study or eliminate you as a security risk. Sarah thought about Dr. Harper's experiment, the documentation they had planned to gather about her abilities. What about Dr. Harper? She's been helping me understand my abilities scientifically. Agent Hayes and Detective Martinez exchanged another look that made Sarah's stomach drop. Ms. Chen, Agent Hayes said carefully, Can you describe Dr. Harper's background and how she became involved in studying your abilities? She's the head of the hospital board and a renowned neurologist. She specializes in consciousness research and brain trauma. Yesterday, after I saved Tommy Williams, she offered to help me document my abilities scientifically. Did she approach you, or did you seek her out? Sarah thought back to the previous day's events. She came to Dr. Webb's office while he was disciplining me for triggering the false alarm. She seemed very interested in how I had known to act when I did. Agent Hayes opened his laptop and began typing rapidly. Ms. Chen, I need you to think carefully. How long has Dr. Harper been at Riverside General Hospital? I'm not sure exactly. She was already there when I started working 3 years ago. And when did she first show interest in your abilities? Yesterday was the first time we spoke directly about them. Agent Hayes turned his laptop screen towards Sarah and Detective Martinez. On the screen was a photograph of Dr. Elizabeth Harper accepting an award at a medical conference. The timestamp showed the photo was taken 4 years ago, and the caption identified her as Dr. Elizabeth Harper, Director of Consciousness Research, Holbrook Institute. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. The Holbrook Institute? Dr. Marcus Holbrook's private research facility. Dr. Harper was his lead researcher. Until the facility was shut down by federal authorities 2 years ago. Detective Martinez leaned back in her chair. So Dr. Harper isn't trying to help Sarah understand her abilities. She's studying them for Holbrook. It appears that way, yes. Sarah thought about the notebook Dr. Harper had given her, the careful documentation she had been instructed to maintain, the trust she had placed in someone who presented herself as an ally. Agent Hayes, if Dr. Harper is working with Dr. Holbrook, then she knows everything I documented in this notebook. Sarah held up the small journal that contained a full day's worth of death date observations. She knows about Detective Martinez's death time, about Janet Collins at the hospital, about everyone I saw today. Which means Dr. Holbrook now has a complete profile of your current abilities and accuracy rate. Detective Martinez checked her watch again. And he has 22 hours and 47 minutes to set up whatever he's planning for tomorrow. Agent Hayes closed his laptop. Miss Chen, I need to ask you something that might be difficult to answer. Among all the death dates you've seen today, were there any that seemed unusual or unexpected? Sarah flipped through her notebook, reviewing the entries she had made throughout the morning. Most of the dates were decades in the future, consistent, with people living normal lifespans. But as she read through her observations, a pattern emerged that chilled her to the bone. Agent Hayes, everyone who works directly with patient care at the hospital, the doctors, nurses, technicians, they all have death dates within the next 6 months. All of them? Every single one. But the administrative staff, security, guards, maintenance workers, their death dates are years or decades away. Detective Martinez and Agent Hayes exchanged grim looks. Dr. Holbrook is planning to eliminate everyone who might have witnessed your abilities in action, Agent Hayes said. He's cleaning up loose ends. Sarah felt responsible for condemning dozens of innocent people to death simply by demonstrating her abilities in their presence. How many people are we talking about? Based on yesterday's response to the Tommy Williams incident, probably 15 to 20 hospital staff members. We have to warn them. Miss Chen, we can't warn them without revealing your abilities, which would expose our investigation and likely prompt Dr. Holbrook to accelerate his timeline. So we just let them die? Agent Hayes was quiet for a moment. Miss Chen, I need you to trust me when I say that stopping Dr. Holbrook permanently is the only way to save not just those hospital workers, but potentially hundreds of future victims. And you want to use me as bait to draw him out. I want to give you the chance to end this before anyone else dies. Sarah looked at the photographs of Dr. Holbrook's previous victims spread across the conference table. 7 people who had developed extraordinary abilities only to have their lives cut short by someone who saw them as experimental subjects rather than human beings. What do you need me to do? Part 4. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Sarah would return to Riverside General Hospital for her evening shift, carrying a modified version of the notebook Dr. Harper had given her. The notebook now contained fabricated entries suggesting that Sarah's abilities were becoming more powerful, that she could see not just death dates, but the specific causes of death, and that she was beginning to predict deaths weeks or months in advance rather than days. Agent Hayes had explained that Dr. Holbrook's previous research suggested he was most interested in subjects whose abilities showed signs of evolution or enhancement. By presenting Sarah as a subject whose powers were rapidly developing, they hoped to make her irresistible as a research opportunity rather than simply another victim to be eliminated. The modified notebook also contained entries designed to protect the hospital staff whose death dates Sarah had actually observed. Instead of showing them dying within 6 months, the fabricated entries showed them living normal lifespans, making them appear to be innocent bystanders rather than potential witnesses who needed to be silenced. Detective Martinez would be positioned in the hospital as an undercover patient, admitted to the emergency department with chest pain that required overnight observation. Her cover story would place her in a position to monitor Sarah while remaining close enough to respond if Dr. Holbrook or Dr. Harper made direct contact. Agent Hayes and his team would maintain surveillance from multiple positions around the hospital, tracking all entrances and monitoring communications. They had also placed tracking devices in Sarah's notebook and clothing, ensuring that if she was taken from the hospital, they could follow her to Dr. Holbrook's current location. As Sarah walked through the automatic doors of Riverside General at 6:45 p.m., she felt like she was entering a theater where everyone else was acting in a play, and she was the only one who knew the real script. The familiar sights and sounds of the hospital took on sinister new meaning. Each colleague potentially a future victim, each interaction potentially monitored by hostile forces. Dr. Harper was waiting at the emergency department information desk, her smile warm and professional as she approached Sarah with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm for their continued research collaboration. "Sarah, how did the documentation go today? I'm eager to review your observations." Sarah forced herself to maintain normal behavior despite knowing that Dr. Harper was likely reporting her every word back to the man who had deliberately destroyed her life 3 years ago. "It was fascinating, Dr. Harper. I recorded 37 different observations, and I'm starting to notice patterns I never saw before." "What kind of patterns?" Sarah opened the modified notebook to an entry that Agent Hayes had carefully crafted to suggest expanding abilities. "I'm seeing more detail than usual. Not just when people will die, but hints about how. And the timeline seems to be extending. I'm seeing dates months ahead instead of just days or weeks." Dr. Harper's eyes lit up with what Sarah now recognized as scientific greed rather than medical curiosity. "That's remarkable. The temporal range of your perception seems to be expanding exponentially. This could represent a breakthrough in our understanding of precognitive abilities." Sarah nodded, playing her role as the unknowing subject while every word felt like poison in her mouth. "There's something else, too. The numbers are becoming clearer, more detailed. Sometimes I can see additional information floating beside the death dates." "What kind of additional information?" Sarah consulted the fabricated entries Agent Hayes had helped her create. "Location indicators sometimes, environmental factors. Yesterday, I saw someone whose death date included what looked like coordinates." Dr. Harper's professional composure slipped for just a moment, revealing an excitement that bordered on predatory. "Sarah, would you be willing to participate in more intensive documentation? I have access to specialized equipment that could help us map the neural pathways involved in your precognitive processing." What kind of equipment? Brain imaging technology, EEG monitoring, sensory deprivation chambers that might enhance your perceptual clarity. Dr. Harper spoke with the enthusiasm of someone describing a favorite hobby rather than invasive medical procedures. The data we could gather might revolutionize neuroscience. Sarah felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into darkness that concealed Dr. Holbrook's true intentions. Where would this testing take place? Here at the hospital. I have a private research facility across town. More advanced equipment, controlled conditions, no interruptions from hospital routines. Dr. Harper paused, seeming to realize that her eagerness might be alarming to someone who believed this was legitimate medical research. Of course, we would proceed at whatever pace makes you comfortable. This is entirely voluntary. Voluntary. The word felt like mockery when Sarah knew that Dr. Harper's previous research subjects had all ended up dead within months of their voluntary participation. But she forced herself to smile with what she hoped looked like genuine interest. That sounds incredible, Dr. Harper. When could we start? Tomorrow evening, if you're available. I could pick you up after your shift, drive you to the facility myself. Tomorrow evening. Less than 24 hours after Detective Martinez was scheduled to die. Sarah wondered if the timing was coincidental or if Dr. Holbrook was planning to eliminate both of them in rapid succession to minimize the risk of loose ends. I'd love to. Should I bring anything specific? Just your notebook and an open mind. Dr. Harper's smile seemed genuine, but Sarah now saw the calculation behind it. Oh, and Sarah? It would be best if we kept this research collaboration between us for now. Hospital administration can be skeptical of innovative research approaches. The request for secrecy confirmed everything Agent Hayes had predicted. Dr. Harper wanted Sarah isolated, cut off from potential help, before bringing her to whatever facility Dr. Holbrook was currently using for his experiments. Of course, I understand completely. Dr. Harper excused herself shortly after, claiming she had administrative duties to complete before the end of the day. Sarah watched her walk toward the elevator bank with the measured stride of someone who believed she had successfully recruited another unsuspecting victim. The rest of Sarah's shift passed with agonizing normalcy. She processed patient intake forms, answered phone calls from worried families, and maintained the routine of her job while knowing that everything around her was a carefully constructed lie. Detective Martinez was brought in just after 8 p.m. with chest pain symptoms that were convincing enough to warrant overnight observation, positioning her perfectly to monitor Sarah without arousing suspicion. As Sarah prepared to leave the hospital at the end of her shift, Maria Santos approached her with a concerned expression that immediately put Sarah on alert. Sarah, mi amor, I need to tell you something strange that happened today. Sarah's pulse quickened. What kind of strange? A doctor came to the cafeteria this afternoon, asking questions about you. Said he was conducting research on hospital staff, who show exceptional intuition about patient care. Sarah forced herself to remain calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. What did he look like? Older man, maybe 60, with gray hair and expensive clothes. Very polite, very professional. But something about him made me uncomfortable. Maria lowered her voice. He asked too many questions about that day when Carlos was sick, about how you knew to make me demand immediate attention. Dr. Holbrook had been at the hospital, gathering information about Sarah's previous interventions. The knowledge that he had been walking the same corridors where she worked, possibly watching her interact with colleagues and patients, made her skin crawl. Did he give you his name? Dr. Mitchell, I think. Said he was from some research institute. But Sarah, after he left, I asked around. Nobody else had heard of any research being conducted on hospital staff. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude toward Maria for her instinctive wariness. Maria, if you see that man again, don't talk to him. And don't mention our conversation to anyone else. Are you in some kind of trouble, mi amor? I hope not. But I need you to be careful for the next few days, okay? Maria nodded, though her expression showed she didn't fully understand the danger she might be in simply by association with Sarah. As Sarah left the hospital that evening, she was acutely aware of Agent Hayes' surveillance team, positioned around the parking garage and adjacent streets. The knowledge that federal agents were watching her every move was both comforting and terrifying, a reminder that her life had become the center of a deadly game with rules she was still learning. Her apartment felt like a sanctuary after the tension of the hospital, but even there she couldn't escape the weight of what tomorrow would bring. Agent Hayes had briefed her extensively on Dr. Holbrook's methods, his history of manipulating subjects through a combination of scientific authority and psychological coercion. She knew that when Dr. Harper picked her up tomorrow evening, she would be walking into a situation where her ability to see death dates might be the only thing keeping her alive. Sarah spent the evening reviewing the fabricated notebook entries, memorizing the false data that might convince Dr. Holbrook she was worth keeping alive for extended study rather than quick elimination. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was using lies about her ability to see death to prevent her own death from being added to Dr. Holbrook's growing list of victims. At 11:47 p.m., her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Harper's number, which immediately put Sarah on high alert since they had agreed to meet the following evening. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call so late, but there's been a change of plans. We need to move up our research session." "Move it up to when?" "Tonight. I know it's sudden, but we've had a breakthrough in our equipment calibration that creates a unique opportunity for data collection." Sarah felt the walls of the trap closing around her. Dr. Holbrook had apparently decided to accelerate his timeline, possibly because of Detective Martinez's investigation or Agent Hayes' surveillance activities. "Dr. Harper, it's almost midnight. I'm not sure I'm at my best for scientific testing at this hour. Actually, that's part of what makes this opportunity so valuable. Your brain activity during altered consciousness states could provide insights we can't get during normal waking hours." The explanation sounded plausible enough to someone who didn't know Dr. Harper's true affiliations, but Sarah recognized it as manipulation designed to make her comply with a request that should have seemed obviously suspicious. "Where should I meet you?" "I'll pick you up at your apartment in 30 minutes. Bring your notebook and dress warmly. The facility can be cold at night." After Dr. Harper hung up, Sarah immediately called Agent Hayes using the secure number he had provided. "They're moving tonight," she said without preamble. "We're ready. The tracking devices in your clothing and notebook are active, and we have teams positioned to follow at a distance. Sarah, remember what we discussed about maintaining your cover until we can identify Dr. Holbrook's current location. What if they try to sedate me or perform procedures I can't consent to? We'll be monitoring your vital signs remotely through the tracking devices. If your heart rate or other indicators suggest you're in immediate physical danger, we'll move in immediately. And if they don't sedate me? If Dr. Holbrook wants to study my abilities while I'm conscious, then you do whatever you have to do to stay alive until we can locate his facility and coordinate a rescue." Sarah hung up the phone and began preparing for what might be the most dangerous night of her life. She dressed in layers as Dr. Harper had suggested, partly for warmth but mostly to conceal the various tracking devices Agent Hayes had provided. The modified notebook felt heavier than usual, weighted with fabricated data that represented her only protection against a man who had already murdered 7 people with abilities similar to hers. At exactly 12:17 a.m., a black sedan pulled up outside Sarah's apartment building. Through her window, she could see Dr. Harper in the driver's seat, checking her watch with the precision of someone following a carefully planned schedule. Sarah took a deep breath, grabbed her notebook, and headed downstairs to what she hoped wouldn't be her final ride. Dr. Harper, greeted her with professional warmth that felt increasingly sinister given what Sarah now knew about her true loyalties. "Sarah, thank you for being flexible about the timing. I know this is unusual, but the data we collect tonight could be groundbreaking." As they drove through the empty Portland streets, Dr. Harper maintained casual conversation about Sarah's experiences at the hospital, her observations of patient behavior, and her thoughts about the potential applications of precognitive abilities. In medical settings, the topics were innocuous enough, but Sarah recognized them as intelligence gathering designed to help Dr. Holbrook understand the full scope of her capabilities. "Dr. Harper, can you tell me more about the research facility we're going to? I'm curious about what kind of equipment you have access to." "It's a private institution focused on consciousness research and neurological phenomena that traditional medical science hasn't fully explored yet." Dr. Harper navigated through an industrial district where warehouses and abandoned buildings created long shadows under intermittent streetlights. "The founder is a brilliant scientist who was unfortunately ahead of his time. His work was dismissed by mainstream academia, but his insights into the connection between brain trauma and enhanced perception are remarkable." Sarah realized Dr. Harper was describing Dr. Holbrook's research without mentioning his name, probably testing to see if Sarah would recognize the connection to her own car accident and subsequent abilities. "It sounds like his research might be relevant to understanding what happened to me after my accident. Very relevant. In fact, he's particularly interested in meeting subjects whose abilities manifested following specific types of brain trauma." They pulled into the parking lot of what appeared to be a converted medical building, 3 stories tall with small windows and the kind of institutional architecture that suggested it had once been a hospital or clinic. Most of the windows were dark, but Sarah could see lights on the 2nd and 3rd floors, indicating active occupation, despite the late hour. "Dr. Harper, how many other people are here tonight?" "Just a small research team. The night shift allows us to work without interruptions from the distractions of daytime medical practice." As they walked toward the building entrance, Sarah noticed security cameras positioned at regular intervals around the perimeter. Agent Hayes' surveillance team would be able to track her location until she entered the building, but once inside, she would be dependent on the tracking devices concealed in her clothing to maintain contact with the outside world. Dr. Harper used a keycard to open the main entrance, leading Sarah into a lobby that retained some of the sterile medical atmosphere of its previous incarnation. The floors were polished concrete, the walls painted institutional beige, and the lighting had the harsh fluorescent quality that Sarah associated with hospitals and government buildings. "The elevators are this way," Dr. Harper said, guiding Sarah toward the back of the lobby. As they waited for the elevator, Sarah noticed a building directory mounted on the wall that listed various research departments and administrative offices. Most of the listings were generic enough to apply to any medical research facility, but one entry caught her attention. "Temporal Perception Laboratory, Floor 3. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and Dr. Harper pressed the button for the 3rd floor. As they rose through the building, Sarah felt like she was ascending toward her own execution, carried upward by machinery that had transported countless other victims to their final appointments with Dr. Holbrook's research. Protocols. The 3rd floor hallway was lined with doors marked only by numbers, giving no indication of what activities were conducted behind them. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of electronic equipment operating somewhere deeper in the building. "This way, Sarah," Dr. Harper said, leading her toward a door marked Laboratory 7. As Dr. Harper reached for the door handle, Sarah made a decision that would determine whether she lived through the night. Instead of following passively into whatever trap awaited her, she stepped back and spoke with a firmness that surprised even her. "Dr. Harper, I want to meet the research director before we begin any procedures." Dr. Harper's hand froze on the door handle. Sarah, that's not really necessary. The research protocols are already established. I insist. If this research is as groundbreaking as you've suggested, I want to understand the full scope of what we're attempting. For a moment, Dr. Harper's professional facade slipped, revealing something calculating and cold underneath. Then she smiled with renewed warmth that felt completely artificial. Of course, Sarah, I should have introduced you properly from the beginning. Dr. Harper opened the door to Laboratory 7, revealing a room filled with medical equipment that looked more suited to a surgical suite than a research facility. Brain imaging machines, monitoring devices, and what appeared to be an examination table with restraints all suggested that the research conducted here involved procedures that subjects might not willingly undergo. But what drew Sarah's attention immediately was the man standing near the far wall, studying charts and medical readouts with the focused intensity of someone reviewing battle plans rather than research data. Dr. Marcus Holbrook looked exactly like the surveillance photographs Agent Hayes had shown her, but seeing him in person created a visceral reaction that photographs couldn't convey. This was the man who had deliberately crashed into her car 3 years ago, who had murdered 7 people with abilities like hers, and who was now preparing to add her to his collection of research subjects. Dr. Holbrook, Dr. Harper said with obvious deference, I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen. Dr. Holbrook turned toward them with a smile that managed to be both charming and predatory simultaneously. Miss Chen, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I've been following your development with great interest. Sarah forced herself to maintain her cover despite every instinct screaming at her to run. Dr. Holbrook, Dr. Harper tells me you're conducting revolutionary research into precognitive abilities. Revolutionary is certainly one way to describe it, Dr. Holbrook said, approaching Sarah with the measured steps of someone who had performed this routine many times before. Ms. Chen, may I ask you to look at me and tell me what you see? Sarah looked up at the space above Dr. Holbrook's head, expecting to see death dates as she did with everyone else. Instead, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Floating above Dr. Holbrook's head were not death dates, but birth dates, dozens of them, representing every person whose abilities he had artificially created through deliberate brain trauma. The dates stretched back 3 years, starting with her own accident and continuing through a timeline of systematic human experimentation. And at the very end of the list, she saw tomorrow's date, November 24th, 2024, representing not a death, but the planned creation of his next victim. Dr. Holbrook was going to cause another accident tomorrow, creating another person with psychic abilities to study and eventually eliminate. What do you see, Ms. Chen? Sarah realized that Dr. Holbrook's question was a test of her abilities, designed to determine whether she could perceive information beyond simple death dates. Her answer would determine whether he considered her valuable enough for extended study or expendable enough for immediate termination. I see dates, she said carefully, but not the kind I usually observe. What kind of dates? Beginning dates, starting points. As if you're connected to the creation of something rather than its ending. Dr. Holbrook's expression shifted to one of genuine fascination. Remarkable. You can perceive temporal causation. In addition to temporal termination, Miss Chen, you may be the most advanced subject I've ever encountered. Advanced subject. The clinical terminology reminded Sarah that to Dr. Holbrook, she wasn't a person but a research specimen whose value was measured by the data she could provide before her inevitable elimination. Dr. Holbrook, what exactly are you researching? The relationship between consciousness and time, Ms. Chen. Specifically, whether traumatic brain injury can unlock latent temporal perception abilities that exist in all human beings but remain dormant under normal circumstances. And you've been testing this theory by deliberately causing brain injuries in unwilling subjects. Dr. Holbrook's facade of scientific respectability dropped entirely. Ms. Chen, scientific advancement has always required sacrifices from those too limited in vision to understand the greater good being served. Sarah realized that Dr. Holbrook had abandoned any pretense that she was a willing research participant. He knew that she knew the truth about his methods, which meant he had moved beyond recruitment into the containment phase of his protocol. "Dr. Harper," Dr. Holbrook said without taking his eyes off Sarah, "please activate the laboratory security system." Dr. Harper moved to a control panel near the door, pressing a series of buttons that caused heavy mechanical locks to engage throughout the laboratory. Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of metal barriers sliding into place, sealing off any possibility of escape. "Miss Chen, I hope you'll forgive the precautions, but your abilities make you far too valuable to risk losing to misguided concerns about conventional ethics." Sarah looked around the laboratory, noting the positions of the various equipment and monitoring devices that would be used to study her abilities before her eventual elimination. The tracking devices concealed in her clothing felt inadequate against the sophisticated security systems Dr. Holbrook had installed, but they represented her only connection to the outside world and Agent Hayes' rescue operation. "Dr. Holbrook, how many people have you killed in pursuit of this research?" "Ms. Chen, I prefer to think of it as recycling valuable resources. Each subject provides data that advances our understanding of human consciousness, and their deaths serve the greater purpose of scientific discovery." The casual way Dr. Holbrook discussed murder as scientific methodology confirmed everything Agent Hayes had told her about his psychological profile. This wasn't someone who could be reasoned with or appealed to through conventional moral arguments. "And what happens to me after you've gathered your data?" "That depends entirely on how valuable your continued existence proves to be." "Ms. Chen, subjects who demonstrate exceptional abilities and cooperative attitudes have occasionally been retained for extended study periods." Sarah understood the implications. Cooperation might buy her additional time, but eventually all of Dr. Holbrook's subjects ended up dead regardless of their usefulness or compliance. "What do you want me to do?" Dr. Holbrook gestured toward the examination table with its ominous restraints. "We'll begin with basic neurological mapping while you exercise your abilities under controlled conditions. Dr. Harper will monitor your brain activity while you observe. Death dates for various individuals will present to you." "What individuals?" "Hospital staff from Riverside General, primarily. We need to verify the accuracy of your predictions before proceeding to more advanced testing." Sarah realized that Dr. Holbrook was planning to use her abilities to confirm the death dates of the hospital workers he intended to eliminate as witnesses to her abilities. Her cooperation would essentially provide him with a kill list organized by the precise timing of each planned murder. "I won't help you murder innocent people." Dr. Holbrook's expression hardened. "Miss Chen, you seem to be under the impression that you have a choice in this matter." He nodded to Dr. Harper, who produced a syringe filled with clear liquid from a nearby medical cart. Sarah recognized the setup from Agent Hayes' briefings about Dr. Holbrook's methods. A sedative would render her compliant without interfering with her psychic abilities. As Dr. Harper approached with the syringe, Sarah made a desperate calculation about her options. She could submit to the sedation and hope that Agent Hayes' tracking devices would lead to a rescue before Dr. Holbrook completed his research. Or she could resist and risk immediate termination, but potentially buy time for outside intervention. "Dr. Holbrook, before you sedate me, there's something you should know about my abilities." "What's that, Ms. Chen? I can see your death date too." Dr. Holbrook stopped moving, his expression shifting to one of intense interest. "That's impossible. I've taken precautions to shield myself from temporal perception." "Your precautions don't work against abilities as advanced as mine," Sarah lied, hoping that his scientific curiosity would override his caution. "Would you like to know when you're going to die?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah knew that Dr. Holbrook's ego and scientific obsession would make it impossible for him to resist learning information that no one else had ever been able to provide. "Tell me." Sarah looked up at the space above Dr. Holbrook's head where the birth dates of his victims continued to float like an accusation. Among them, she noticed something she had missed before, a single death date, faint but clearly visible. November 24th, 2024, 3:47 a.m. Dr. Holbrook was going to die in less than 3 hours. "You're going to die at 3:47 this morning," Sarah said with complete confidence. Dr. Holbrook laughed, but the sound carried an edge of uncertainty. "Ms. Chen, that's less than 3 hours from now. I'm in perfect health, surrounded by security systems, and in complete control of this situation. Death doesn't care about your security systems, Dr. Holbrook, and you're not in as much control as you think you are." As if summoned by her words, the building's fire alarm began sounding throughout the facility. The fire alarm's piercing wail filled Laboratory 7 with chaos that shattered Dr. Holbrook's carefully controlled environment. Emergency lighting bathed the room in red shadows while automated systems began shutting down sensitive equipment to prevent damage from potential water suppression systems. Dr. Holbrook's calm demeanor evaporated as he realized that his secure facility had been compromised. He grabbed a radio from his coat pocket, speaking rapidly into it while Dr. Harper moved toward the control panel to check the building's security status. "Control room, what's the status of the alarm system? Is this a drill or an actual emergency?" Static crackled from the radio before a panicked voice responded. "Dr. Holbrook, we have federal agents surrounding the building. They're demanding evacuation of all personnel and threatening to breach the facility if we don't comply." Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with terror. Agent Hayes had found the facility, but the timing meant she was still trapped inside with two people who had nothing left to lose. Dr. Holbrook's face twisted with rage as he processed the implications of the federal raid. 3 years of careful planning and systematic murder were about to be exposed, and Sarah represented the only remaining evidence of his successful research into artificially induced psychic abilities. "Dr. Harper, initiate the data destruction. Protocol. All files, all equipment, all evidence of our research must be eliminated before they breach the building." Dr. Harper's fingers flew over the control panel, activating systems designed to destroy any trace of the experiments that had been conducted in the facility. Hard drives began wiping themselves, paper documents fed into industrial shredders, and chemical solutions started dissolving biological samples that might contain DNA evidence from Dr. Holbrook's victims. "What about the subject?" Dr. Harper asked, gesturing toward Sarah. Sarah felt the weight of their stares as they considered her fate. She was living proof of Dr. Holbrook's research success, but she was also a witness whose testimony could destroy them both if she survived to testify. "The subject represents too much risk if she falls into federal custody," Dr. Holbrook said with clinical detachment. "Terminate her and dispose of the body through the medical waste system." Dr. Harper reached for a different syringe, this one filled with a substance that Sarah recognized from her hospital training as potassium chloride, a drug that would cause immediate cardiac arrest and leave minimal forensic evidence. "Dr. Holbrook," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "you still have 47 minutes before your death time. Don't you want to know how it happens?" Dr. Holbrook paused in his preparations for escape, his scientific curiosity warring with his survival instincts. Despite the chaos surrounding them, he couldn't resist the opportunity to test the accuracy of Sarah's prediction against an immediate timeline. "You're claiming I'll die at 3:47 a.m. regardless of current circumstances? The time never changes." "Dr. Holbrook, death doesn't negotiate." "Then you should have seen this coming," Dr. Harper said, lunging towards Sarah with the lethal injection. Sarah twisted away from the syringe, using the examination table as a barrier between herself and Dr. Harper. The movement triggered the tracking devices in her clothing to send an emergency signal, alerting Agent Hayes' team that she was in immediate physical danger. The laboratory's main door exploded inward as federal agents breached the security systems using shaped charges. Smoke and debris filled the room while tactical teams poured through the opening with weapons drawn and voices shouting commands. Federal agents, nobody move. Hands where we can see them. Dr. Harper dropped the syringe and raised her hands, but Dr. Holbrook made a desperate dash toward what appeared to be a secondary exit concealed behind a bank of monitoring equipment. Agent Hayes appeared through the smoke, his weapon trained on Dr. Holbrook's retreating figure. Holbrook, stop running. There's nowhere to go. Dr. Holbrook ignored the command, disappearing through the hidden exit into what must have been a prepared escape route. Agent Hayes signaled to his team before pursuing, leaving Sarah in the custody of the remaining federal agents who were securing the laboratory and gathering evidence. Miss Chen, are you injured? Agent Davis, one of Hayes' team members, approached. Sarah with medical equipment. We monitored your vital signs during the confrontation. Your heart rate indicated extreme stress. I'm okay, but Dr. Holbrook escaped. He's got some kind of secret exit from this room. Agent Hayes is pursuing him through the building's service corridors. The entire facility is surrounded. Holbrook won't get far. As the agents processed the scene, Sarah found herself staring at Dr. Harper, who sat in handcuffs with an expression of defeat mixed with defiance. This woman had presented herself as a medical professional interested in advancing scientific understanding, but had actually been complicit in systematic murder. Dr. Harper, how many people did you help him kill? Dr. Harper met Sarah's eyes with cold calculation. Ms. Chen, you have no idea what you've destroyed tonight. Dr. Holbrook's research could have revolutionized human consciousness, unlocked abilities that would have advanced our species beyond current limitations. By murdering innocent people. Who trusted you? By making necessary sacrifices for the greater good of scientific advancement. Agent Davis pulled Sarah aside before she could respond to Dr. Harper's twisted justification. Ms. Chen, we need you to remain here while we process the scene, but I want you to know that your cooperation made tonight's operation possible. Without your willingness to serve as bait, we never would have located this facility or gathered enough evidence to prosecute Holbrook and Harper. Sarah nodded, though she felt no satisfaction in the praise. 7 people with abilities like hers had died before she was able to help stop Dr. Holbrook's experiments. The guilt of surviving, when they didn't, would likely haunt her for the rest of her life. Agent Hayes' voice crackled through Agent Davis's radio. Davis, we've cornered Holbrook on the building's roof. He's threatening to jump rather than surrender. Copy that. Do you need additional support? Negative. But tell Ms. Chen that her prediction about Holbrook's death time is about to be tested. It's currently 3:44 a.m. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. Dr. Holbrook had 3 minutes left, according to the death date she had seen above his head, and he was apparently preparing to fulfill that prediction through suicide rather than capture. The radio remained silent for several minutes while agents throughout the building awaited news from the rooftop confrontation. Sarah found herself watching the digital clock on one of the laboratory's monitoring devices, counting down the final minutes of Dr. Holbrook's life. 3:45 a.m., 2 minutes remaining. 3:46 a.m., 1 minute remaining. At exactly 3:47 a.m., Agent Hayes' voice returned to the radio with news that confirmed the absolute accuracy of Sarah's temporal perception. This is Hayes. Holbrook is down. He attempted to jump from the roof, but lost his footing while positioning himself. Fell 3 stories into the building's courtyard. Medical team is responding, but he's clearly deceased. Agent Davis looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. Ms. Chen, you predicted the exact time of his death down to the minute. The numbers are always accurate, Sarah said quietly. I just wish I could have used them to save lives instead of just documenting deaths. But you did save lives tonight. Detective Martinez, the hospital staff whose death dates you recorded. Potentially dozens of future victims who would have been targeted if Holbrook had continued his experiments. As federal agents continued processing the laboratory, Sarah learned the full scope of Dr. Holbrook's research facility. The building contained 3 floors of sophisticated equipment, designed to study and enhance psychic abilities in unwilling subjects. Files recovered from the partially destroyed archives revealed that Dr. Holbrook had been planning to expand his operations nationwide, creating a network of facilities where people with induced psychic abilities could be studied and exploited. Dr. Harper's interrogation revealed that she had been Dr. Holbrook's primary recruiter, using her position at Riverside General Hospital to identify potential subjects and gather intelligence about individuals who might possess latent psychic abilities. Her medical credentials had provided perfect cover for approaching victims under the guise of legitimate research. Detective Martinez arrived at the facility just after dawn, having maintained her undercover position at the hospital until Agent Hayes confirmed that the operation was complete. She found Sarah sitting in the building's lobby, wrapped in a federal agent's jacket and staring out at the Portland sunrise through windows that had been shattered during the raid. "Sarah, how are you holding up? I keep thinking about the 7 people who died before tonight. Rebecca Morrison, David Park, Jennifer Walsh, Michael Rodriguez. All of them had abilities that could have helped people, but instead they were murdered by someone who saw them as laboratory specimens." Detective Martinez sat down beside Sarah on one of the lobby's uncomfortable plastic chairs. "Sarah, you can't blame yourself for what happened to them. You were a victim of Holbrook's experiments just like they were, but I survived when they didn't. I had 3 years to figure out what was happening and try to stop it. You did stop it. Tonight, when you chose to trust Agent Hayes and participate in the operation that brought down Holbrook's entire network." Sarah looked at Detective Martinez, remembering that less than 24 hours ago she had seen November 24th, 2024, floating above the detective's head as her death date. Now it was November 24th, and Detective Martinez was very much alive. "Detective Martinez, can I ask you something? Yesterday I saw your death date as today at 2:33 p.m., but you're alive and that time has passed. What happened?" Detective Martinez checked her watch, which showed 6:23 a.m. "Sarah, at 2:33 p.m. today, I'm scheduled to testify before a federal grand jury about Holbrook's crimes. In a sense, my old life as a local detective investigating unusual deaths will end at that exact moment, and my new life as a federal witness will begin." Sarah felt a profound shift in her understanding of what the death dates actually represented. Perhaps they weren't always biological death, but sometimes the end of one phase of existence and the beginning of another. "Detective Martinez, that means the numbers above people's heads might not always predict actual death. Maybe they predict transformation, endings that make way for new beginnings." The possibility opened up entirely new interpretations of Sarah's ability. If the death dates could represent metaphorical deaths, the end of careers, relationships, life phases, or identities, then her gift might be even more complex than she had realized. Agent Hayes joined them in the lobby as the sun climbed higher over Portland, casting long shadows through the damaged windows. He looked exhausted but satisfied, carrying a thick file folder that contained preliminary evidence gathered from the facility. "Miss Chen, Detective Martinez, I wanted to update you on what we've discovered in Holbrook's files." He opened the folder to reveal photographs, medical records, and research notes that documented the full scope of Dr. Holbrook's experiments. The evidence painted a picture of systematic human experimentation that had been conducted with scientific precision and complete disregard for human life. Holbrook's records show that he identified potential subjects through a network of medical professionals positioned at hospitals throughout the Pacific Northwest Dr. Harper was just one of several recruiters who helped him locate individuals with psychological profiles that suggested they might develop psychic abilities following traumatic brain injury. Sarah studied the photographs of Dr. Holbrook's victims, recognizing some faces from the images Detective Martinez had shown her the previous day. But there were also new faces, people she hadn't known about, victims whose deaths had been successfully disguised as accidents or natural causes. How many people did he actually kill? Based on the evidence we've recovered so far, at least 23 individuals over the past 5 years. But his operation was expanding, and we found plans for facilities in 6 other states. The scope of Dr. Holbrook's crimes was staggering. Sarah realized that her decision to trust Agent Hayes and participate in the sting operation had prevented countless future murders. Agent Hayes, what happens now? Will there be trials, media coverage, public exposure of what Holbrook was doing? There will definitely be federal prosecutions for Dr. Harper and any other surviving members of Holbrook's network. As for media coverage, that will depend partly on how much detail the Department of Justice decides to release about the psychic abilities research. Sarah understood the implications. The existence of genuine psychic abilities, artificially induced through brain trauma, would be explosive news that could trigger government interest in weaponizing such abilities, or public panic about the potential for anyone to be targeted for forced experimentation. What about my abilities? Will I be expected to continue using them for law enforcement or government purposes? Agent Hayes closed the file folder and studied Sarah's face with the expression of someone choosing his words carefully. Ms. Chen, the federal government has no interest in forcing you to use your abilities against your will. You've already done more than enough by helping us stop Holbrook's operation. But my abilities could be useful for preventing crimes, solving missing persons cases, predicting terrorist attacks. They could also make you a target for other researchers who might want to replicate Holbrook's work. Sometimes the most valuable gift is knowing when not to use the gifts you've been given. As the morning progressed and federal agents completed their evidence gathering, Sarah found herself thinking about her future. For 3 years, she had lived with the burden of seeing everyone's death while feeling powerless to change most of those fates. Now she understood that her ability was more nuanced than she had realized, and that she had actually saved more lives than she knew. Tommy Williams would grow up healthy and unaware that he had once been targeted for murder. Carlos Santos would continue playing soccer and getting good grades, never knowing that his survival had helped expose a nationwide network of human experimentation. Detective Martinez would continue her career in federal law enforcement, using her experience with unusual cases to help other victims of crimes that defied conventional investigation. Dr. Harper was taken into federal custody just after noon, still maintaining that Dr. Holbrook's research had been justified by its potential benefits to human knowledge. Sarah watched through the lobby windows as the woman who had tried to deliver her to a murderer was placed in an unmarked van and driven away toward a future that would likely include decades in federal prison. As the afternoon sun began to set over Portland, Sarah prepared to return to her apartment and her job at Riverside General Hospital. The emergency department would seem different now, knowing that she had been under surveillance for months by people who saw her as an experimental subject rather than a human being. Agent Hayes walked her to the parking garage where a federal agent would drive her home, providing protection until they were certain that no other members of Dr. Holbrook's network remained at large. Miss Chen, before you go, I want you to know that what you did took extraordinary courage. Most people in your situation would have tried to hide from their abilities rather than using them to help others. Agent Hayes, I spent 3 years thinking my ability was a curse that set me apart from everyone else. Learning that I wasn't alone, that other people had developed similar abilities and used them to help others, that changes how I think about what happened to me. What will you do now? Sarah looked back at the building where she had nearly died, where Dr. Holbrook's research had finally been exposed and ended. Tomorrow she would return to her job processing patient intake forms and answering phones, but she would do so with a new understanding of her role in the larger world. I'm going to keep working at the hospital, keep helping patients when I can, and keep documenting what I observe. But I'm also going to find ways to honor the memory of the people who didn't survive Dr. Holbrook's experiments. How? By making sure their deaths led to something meaningful. Maybe establishing a foundation to help other victims of illegal medical experimentation, or supporting research into legitimate applications of psychic abilities. As the federal vehicle carried Sarah through the Portland streets toward her apartment, she reflected on everything that had changed in the past 48 hours. She was no longer alone with her ability, no longer ignorant of its origins, and no longer passive about using it to help others. The death dates still floated above people's heads as she observed them through the car window, but now she understood that those dates represented possibilities rather than certainties, endings that could sometimes be prevented or transformed into new beginnings. Above the head of the federal agent driving her home, Sarah saw a date that was decades in the future, indicating a long life filled with the satisfaction of protecting others from the kinds of crimes that Dr. Holbrook had committed. Above the head of a young mother pushing a stroller across the street, she saw dates that suggested the woman would live to see her grandchildren grow up. And above her own reflection in the car window, Sarah saw something she had never noticed before: no death date at all. Just empty space where the future remained unwritten, waiting for her to decide what role her abilities would play in the years ahead. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah Chen felt genuinely hopeful about tomorrow. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a congressional subcommittee investigating illegal human experimentation, delivering testimony that would lead to new federal protections for people with unusual abilities and stronger oversight of private medical research facilities. Detective Martinez sat in the gallery, having been promoted to a federal task force specializing in crimes involving individuals with psychic abilities. Dr. Harper had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, her medical license permanently revoked, and her research findings classified to prevent their misuse by other potential experimenters. The facility where Sarah had nearly died had been converted into a legitimate research center studying the therapeutic applications of psychic abilities in medical settings. Tommy Williams started 2nd grade that fall, healthy and happy, never knowing that he had once been 30 seconds away from death in a hospital emergency room. Carlos Santos made the high school varsity soccer team, his appendix scar barely visible and his future bright with possibilities that wouldn't have existed without Sarah's intervention. Maria Santos continued working in the hospital cafeteria, greeting Sarah each morning with a smile that carried the gratitude of a mother whose child had been saved by someone who cared enough to press an alarm button when nobody else could see the emergency coming. And Sarah continued to see the death dates floating above people's heads, but now she understood them as invitations rather than inevitabilities, opportunities to make a difference in the time between now and then. To help write stories that ended with hope instead of tragedy. Sometimes the most extraordinary gift is learning that you're not as powerless as you thought, that the future can be changed by those brave enough to speak up when others remain silent, and that death itself becomes less frightening when you realize how much life can be saved along the way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.